If we can't stop eating food that we're told is bad for us, that we're told is ruining our health, that we're told in some cases is killing us, what is that if not addiction? We're going to unpack this here today, and I promise by the time we're done, you're going to be in a position of much more power and clarity with food. So stick with me here, and we'll get this done. So one of the most famous studies that people have used to support the idea of food addiction involved rats that had been deprived, essentially starved. And the Minnesota starvation experiment, one of the most famous studies ever conducted on dietary restriction, both indicate that under certain circumstances, symptoms of what we could call addiction can start to show up around food. This falls in line with what a lot of people experience around food. I experienced it at one point in time, actually for many years. The more I eat certain foods, the more I want them. And we're essentially talking about UPFs here, ultra-processed foods. No one makes this claim about apples. So the problem with these situations is that in most cases, when symptoms of addiction start to occur, when we start to have an addiction-like experience, deprivation is usually a factor. Also, when it comes to food, research has shown us that we will often begin to obsess over what we tell ourselves we can't have, which is a serious problem in a world where we can't leave the house without tripping over a fast food restaurant and someone throwing a Mars bar at us. And when people talk about things like dopamine and serotonin in the same sentence as food and food addiction, if it were as simple as that, people would be checking into rehab to address their dependence on things like hugs and puppies, and a bunch of other things that we all love but would never associate with addiction. But this question still remains, what about situations where we're eating way more food than we would ever need, but still can't stop, even though the doctor might be saying that it's killing us, even though it might not be aligned with our values, even though it makes us feel bad, even though there are clearly negative consequences? Again, what is that if not addiction? It would appear that at that point, the food addiction hinges on dietary restriction argument starts to fall apart. But this is where the uniqueness of food really starts to play out. Things like self-image, social pressure, and health anxiety start to make it very complicated. The thing with food is we can experience mental restriction, mental deprivation, mental scarcity, even in situations when we have an abundance of food. And research on guilt and shame supports the idea that those emotions, those feelings, are more likely to drive us towards the things that we're trying to stop doing. So shame and guilt, rather than be the kind of motivators that create lasting change, they actually drive us back towards the coping strategies or the habits that we're often trying to avoid. Since leaving the fitness industry and focusing on helping people with food on a one-to-one basis, I've worked with literally hundreds of people for long periods of time, having in-depth conversations about their experiences, their thoughts, their emotions, their values, their beliefs. I've written literally thousands of pages of notes, insights, observations, and action steps for my clients, all while getting an understanding of their unique experience. And there are unavoidable patterns that emerge. What's really clear to me is that people who experience a lot of shame, people who experience a lot of guilt, people who hate their bodies and treat certain foods like they're bad, poison, evil, immoral, people struggling with this get stuck in a loop. Whereas people who've come to me feeling totally hopeless but begin getting regular meals and snacks, treating non-judgment as a skill that can be practiced rather than an abstract philosophy, putting a stop to obsessive body checking in the mirror and on the scales, focusing on how food choices make us feel viscerally in the body rather than morally or intellectually, and working on self-acceptance and creating a secure place within themselves. These people have a totally transformative experience surrounding food. They go from feeling despair and frustration to feeling like they have their life back. But all that can start sounding kind of hard and esoteric, right? Much easier to adopt the soldier's mentality, that mindset of get the job done at any cost, regardless of how I feel. That mindset is often encouraged and feels a lot more tangible and reliable. For some of us, it can feel more realistic. It's much simpler to say, let's go to war on carbs, than it is to look at what's going on inside us, ask some difficult questions, unpack some things that need unpacking, and develop some new skills that feel kind of uncomfortable at first. Much simpler to believe it's food. It's food that's the problem. Because like we said, there are people literally eating themselves to death. If not addiction, then what? No matter how much we want to say no to those brownies, when every single fiber of our being seems to pull us towards them, regardless of what we want. Surely that feels like addiction, right? When I was going through some of the worst years of my own struggles with food and body image, I was moonlighting as a guitar player, and Class A substances were a big part of my life in those years. They were everywhere, yet I could more easily regulate my consumption of those than I could stop myself from driving to 7-Eleven at 9 p.m. at night, buying $50 worth of food, and sitting in my car eating until I hated myself. Also, when I say Class A substances, you know what I mean, right? I'm not going to say the actual name because I don't want YouTube to limit the reach of this video. But this is what I mean. Doesn't this prove that ultra-processed foods are more addictive, or at least just as addictive, as Class A substances? But with food, it's not that simple. What I was experiencing felt like addiction. I experienced it like an addiction, but there were other things going on. I hated my body. My sense of self-worth was extremely unstable. All it took for me to feel worthless was looking in the mirror at a bad angle, or not liking what I saw when I saw my reflection one day, or standing on the scales and not liking what I saw, or having a bad day at work when I didn't feel like I met my own expectations, let alone if someone criticized me or rejected me. I viewed certain foods as categorically bad and associated them with failure, not just failure in my goals to stick to a particular diet, but me failing as a human being, failing as a man. There were feelings and emotions and things that I was going through that I was just not willing to face. What we're facing here with food addiction is a situation where people are trying to put food in the same category, or specifically ultra-processed foods in the same category as Class A substances, saying that they are addictive, that they are dangerous, and that abstinence is the answer, while other people outright reject the notion that food addiction is even a thing and dismiss the experience of literally millions of people. What I'm suggesting is a much more thorough understanding of how what we're calling food addiction actually works. Personally, I don't believe the word addiction, as much as it speaks to the experience, is a helpful word to use in the context of food. The word addiction, I believe, draws far too many parallels with substances that react very differently with our brain and body than food does, and encourages the idea that abstinence is the way forward. But research has shown us, for the vast majority of cases, when we try to go down the abstinence route with certain foods, it leads to obsession and often binge eating. I know there are plenty of people out there who've amassed massive followings on social media by making claims that, I haven't eaten carbohydrates since 2012 or whatever, and I feel fine. Sure. Assuming those people aren't lying, maybe that is their experience. Maybe they do feel good doing that. But what I can tell you for certain is that they are statistical outliers. And if you're going to bet on an approach for your own health, well-being, physical and mental, then it's just not a great idea to bet on being an outlier. There are more reliable ways to navigate this territory. We don't need to roll the dice on being a statistical anomaly. So do we as a society need to push for more accountability with food companies? Yeah, sure. Should we aim to have a better food environment when more nutritious foods are more readily available for everybody? Yeah, absolutely. The food industry is a commercial industry. There's a lot of greed in the food industry. Not everything that everyone in the food industry does is in the public's best interest. That's just a fact. So should we aim to create a better food environment? Sure. But treating certain foods like contraband is more likely to lead to obsession and binge eating than lasting positive health outcomes. So where does that leave us? Where do you have power in this situation? When it comes to our experience of food, what happens in our mind matters. When we're willing to treat things like non-judgment as a skill that can be practiced rather than some obscure philosophy, It puts us in a position of power and clarity when navigating big feelings and making decisions. Guilt, shame, and conditional self-worth lead to just the kind of relationship with food that we experience as addiction. We can do things like treat unconditional self-worth not as a feeling that we wait for or try to cultivate, but as a set of practices that reflect how we act towards ourselves. And if part of your mind right now is going, oh my God, stop with this mindset bullshit, I get it. I really do. I'm not saying this stuff is going to resolve the massive, multifaceted issue that is a global problem when it comes to food. But these are the steps that you can start to take to give yourself more power in this situation, so you can stop hanging your hopes on false solutions that are based on misrepresented data. Some people might say that self-worth means showing up to diet and exercise a specific way no matter how you feel, because you're worth it, right? And that's not what I'm saying here. That's like a fitness influencer bastardization of this idea. That is conditional self-worth, putting on a mask and sneaking in through the back door. What I'm suggesting is to ask yourself the following questions. How would I act? What would I do? How would I live each day if I already believed that I was enough? Would I put myself through diets and training programs that took over my life? I'm gonna say probably not. Would I do nothing but sit on the couch eating Doritos until I felt like shit? Again, I'm gonna say probably not. If I screwed up in some way or did something that really wasn't my best work, would I say, bummer, I wonder what I can do better next time? Or would I hate myself? Would I listen to people who put themselves on pedestals while talking down to me? How would I act if I was already enough? We're going to encounter difficult feelings. We're going to have to make our way through difficult thoughts. We might experience days when part of us struggles to imagine how we're ever going to feel good again. Okay, what can we do to create a window of tolerance for that so we can still show up, acting in accordance with unconditional self-worth? Part of this might be coaching or therapy territory. Part of this might be a journey you go on by yourself. But here's what we know about what's being called food addiction. Guilt, shame, conditional self-worth, lack of fulfillment, all these things play a role. It takes courage to address those things, and for some people, pharmaceutical support might be the thing that holds the door open to do that work. But how much simpler does it feel to say, the problem is food. Chocolate is the problem. Ice cream is the problem. If you want to gain power and clarity in this situation, remember guilt, shame, conditional self-worth. These things live at the core of what's being called and experienced as food addiction. And one of the most important things that we can do to find our way through this mess is by putting a stop to investing time and energy in false solutions. And by false solutions, I mean the narrative that food belongs in the same category as Class A substances and is something that we can address through abstinence. Shame, guilt, conditional self-worth. We know how to address these issues. It's hard, but we know how to address them. And even if it is hard, it's a hell of a lot easier than spending a lifetime banging our head against a wall with a solution or a strategy that was never going to work. So before labeling food as the enemy, look at how shame, guilt, conditional self-worth, lack of fulfillment, look at how these things might be showing up in your life. I know it's confronting. I know it might even be frightening, but we'll get further asking that question than we will investing in a false solution. Therapy, coaching, medical support, the right pharmaceutical support sometimes. These are all things that might come into play in different people's personal journeys. And I know there are a lot of people in the health and wellness space who turn their nose up at things like pharmaceutical support. And like the food industry, does the pharmaceutical industry have a lot to answer for? Yeah. Is the pharmaceutical industry perfect? No. Have pharmaceuticals saved lives? Yeah. Are they the right answer for everyone? No. Throughout my own journey, different doctors and professionals recommended 1,000 different approaches along the way, all in opposing directions. It was confusing and hard and fucking annoying. But at the very start, if I had understood the role that guilt, shame, conditional self-worth, and even lack of fulfillment were playing in what I was experiencing, the whole journey would have been much easier. And we could continue unpacking this for days. So make sure you're subscribed, because I'll be doing future videos that are offshoots of this topic. So let me know in the comments if there are any questions you have or any parts of this you'd like me to unpack further. My name's Marcus. This was Strong Not Starving. I'll see you next time.